The first jihad was the movement by Islam at the point of the sword throughout the Middle East. The second jihad was the move into Europe, finally halted on the outskirts of Vienna in 1683. And in fact, the date marked is 9/11, so referenced by bin Laden and Zawahiri and others who pushed forward the third jihad. The third jihad is now again in Vienna. We bring up Elisabeth Wolff, an Austrian human rights and anti-Sharia activist, intimately involved in the efforts at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Elisabeth Wolff.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you also to Karen for inviting me. I've come a long way, but I would go anywhere to speak for you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege to be here in the United States of America, because this is a place where I can speak my mind and say what I think without fear of being arrested and prosecuted. Speaking your mind is your right under the First Amendment. But Europeans do not have this right. Yes, once upon a time, free speech was granted to us as a privilege, but that privilege has since been withdrawn. The government giveth, and the government taketh away. All across Western Europe, from Sweden to Britain, from Germany to Austria, citizens are being singled out and harassed for what they say. They are being put under surveillance by the state. They lose their jobs, they are being prosecuted, and when they are convicted, they are fined and sometimes even sent to prison. But by now, you're probably wondering what it is that people are saying that gets them in so much trouble with the state. Are they fomenting insurrection? Are they threatening to assassinate their political leaders? Are they inciting violence? Or a rebellion even? No. It's nothing as exciting as that. Ordinary, peaceful Europeans who just happen to love their countries are being targeted for criticizing multiculturalism. They are being threatened with legal action for questioning their country's immigration policies. You've probably heard of the so-called European refugee crisis, which has been underway since the beginning of last summer. Europe is being inundated with immigrants from the Middle East and Africa, most of them Muslims. During the past year, upwards of 1 million migrants entered Germany alone. Sweden, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Austria, including Italy, of course, have also seen a huge surge in immigration. I just now saw, as I was checking the Austrian news online, that Austria is now officially up 56% of immigrants as compared to last year. As a result, there has been a rapid spike in the crime rate in all of these countries, especially crimes against women and girls. Harassment, groping, molestation, and rape. Public swimming pools in Germany have become notorious as hunting grounds for young Muslim males who prey on women, young girls, and little boys. Even old women as old as 70 have been raped in Austria. The horrible fact is that molestation and rape have become everyday occurrences in Austria, in Germany, and all over the place. Conscientious Europeans are objecting to immigration. This is why ordinary citizens are questioning the wisdom of allowing Islam into Europe. And this is why the state is cracking down on free speech, because there must be no criticism, no questioning, no objections to Islamization. The European establishment, for reasons known best to itself, has decided not to address the systemic problem represented by Muslim immigration, but rather suppress any and all criticism or even discussion of the issue. As far as elites are concerned, the policy has been decided. It has been fixed in place, and there is no going back. The fact that most Western European countries will have Muslim majorities in 50 years is of no concern to our leaders. They and their families live in gated communities far from the mean streets of Sharia zones, where gang violence is the norm. They will never have to experience the joys of multiculturalism directly. Why should they care? This is the backdrop behind the crackdown on free speech in Europe. 10 years ago, when I started being a part of this movement, there were hardly any prosecutions of hate speech. 5 years ago, there were several dozen such cases, including my own. We have to understand that there can be no longer any doubt that our political leaders have become traitors to their own people. This is especially true of the unelected and unaccountable leaders who run the totalitarian apparatus of the European Union in Brussels. Their immigration policy is being shoved down the throats of the member states of the European Union without any regard for the opinion of the national governments or the European people. As I mentioned earlier, activists are being arrested and prosecuted all over Europe. For instance, my friend Geert Wilders, the leader of the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands, is the most prominent example. He will go on trial for the third time this fall. I also referred to Dan Park in Sweden and Tommy Robinson in England. Tommy is also a very courageous man, and he has actually spent prison time. Other examples are Jussi Halla-aho in Finland, Michael Stürzenberger in Germany, and Lars Hedegaard in Denmark. My friend Paul Weston was arrested for publicly quoting Winston Churchill's words about Islam. That is how bad it has become, and that is how bad it is. Now, I will describe very briefly my own case, which is fairly typical of what is happening in these days. In 2008, I began a series of seminars in Vienna under the auspices of the Austrian Freedom Party, explaining to members and other interested parties what Islam, the Quran, and the Hadith really teach, along with basic tenets of Islamic law. In my presentations, I discussed the consequences for democracy, freedom, and human rights today. Because of the success of my seminars, they drew the attention of leftists who were and are still determined to discredit and destroy anybody who dares to criticize Islam. To them, we are racist, fascists, Islamophobes. And without my knowledge, an Austrian magazine sent a reporter to one of these seminars to make a secret recording of it. As a result, in late November of 2009, a criminal complaint was filed against me for hate speech under Article 283 of the Austrian Criminal Code. From an Austrian left-wing perspective, my crime was made worse by the fact that my seminars were held under the auspices of the Freedom Party. The complaint against me was not filed by the state, but rather by this magazine, the publication whose reporter had infiltrated my seminar. For the next 10 months, the possibility of a formal charge was left hanging over my head, but I received no official word. All I did was hire a lawyer, of course. No, I did not hire a judge just yet. So after I gave a deposition to the Office of the Protection of the Constitution, I heard absolutely nothing from the prosecutor's office. But later that year, I learned that a formal charge would be filed against me. And a few days later, I even received official notice from the court that my trial date would be in November of 2010. Now comes the interesting part. So all of you lawyers in here, listen up. You won't believe what happened. During my trial, the issue of pedophilia came up in light of Muhammad's status as the perfect example for Muslims, as stated in Quran 33:21. I explained what the Hadith collections are and that they constitute an indispensable part of Islamic scripture. I emphasized that I had made up nothing of what I had said, but simply quoted canonical Islamic scripture concerning Muhammad's conduct, including his marriage to a little girl named Aisha. The trial was then adjourned until the following January 2011. At the second hearing, excerpts of the recording were played back, of the recording of the seminar were played back, and it became very clear that there was no hate speech whatsoever. The judge discussed my statement that the conduct of Muhammad is exemplary for Muslims and took particular issue with the statement, and I'm quoting myself here, "What exactly would it be called today if not pedophilia?" which was a reference to the Prophet's marriage to a 6-year-old girl, of course. Evidently aware that the charge of incitement to hatred wasn't never going to fly, the judge, at her own discretion, eventually announced a new charge: denigration of religious teachings of a legally recognized religion. My defense was unprepared for this, and so we requested that the trial be adjourned. When the court reconvened, events moved swiftly to a close. The judge decided that the language used in my seminars did not in any way incite hatred, but utterances regarding Mohammedan pedophilia were punishable. In particular, the judge found that the use of pedophilia was factually incorrect, and this is a sexual preference solely or mainly directed towards children. The judge stated that this cannot apply to Muhammad, who was still married to Aisha when she attained the age of 18. Thus, I was not found guilty on the charge of incitement to hatred, but guilty on the charge of denigration of religious beliefs of a legally recognized religion. I was fined 480 euros, which is equivalent to about $500 or $510, or 60 days in prison. The charge, as you will all agree, was ludicrous. Of course, I appealed my conviction to a higher court. The verdict was upheld. Later, we went to the Austrian Supreme Court. Again, verdict was upheld. I have now exhausted all my options within Austria, but the case has now been put before the European Court of Human Rights. It was accepted a year ago, ladies and gentlemen. After 5 years of waiting, it has now been accepted, and a decision is expected fairly soon. Whichever way the court decides, the verdict will have implications for citizens throughout Europe and not just for Austrians. If my conviction is overturned, it will set an important precedent for the freedom to criticize religions and religiously sanctioned conduct. And you will hear about it. If we win, you will hear about it. So hopefully by the end of this year, we will know more. And just like you here in the United States, we in Austria are also called to the voting booths again this year. As you may have heard, the results of the recent Austrian presidential election had to be annulled due to the possibility of irregularities in the absentee ballots. The candidate of the Freedom Party, Norbert Hofer, was ahead and projected to win until the postal votes were counted. For some mysterious reasons, the Green Party opponent was favored overwhelmingly in the absentee ballots. So we're facing a rerun of the election this fall, and the Freedom Party candidate is once again favored to win, and this time the postal votes will be carefully monitored, so we shall see what happens. The Brexit vote has emboldened the right-of-center politicians in EU member states to discuss a possible exit from the European Union. Norbert Hofer is one of them. He recently said that the accession of Turkey to the EU would compel Austria to withdraw from the European Union. Thus, the breakup of the European Union is a distinct possibility. Ladies and gentlemen, the truth can be considered hate speech. Discussing verifiable facts about Islam, its doctrines, its history, the behavior of Muslims in the name of Allah may upset Muslims and incite them to become violent. This proves hate speech has occurred regardless of the truth of what was said. And it means that your right to utter such truths may be restricted. The enforcement of a hate speech regime thus leads to the denial of the obvious. We deny the origin and meaning of the most evil occurrences around the globe. A Syrian refugee kills his pregnant girlfriend? Keep quiet, otherwise you will be found guilty of hate speech. A Tunisian man kills children by running them over with a truck on the streets of Nice? Better not say or write anything about this madness if you want to keep your job and stay out of jail. And so we refuse to articulate a message of resistance against the evil we see around us. Our political and social leaders have granted us free speech, but with buts. Yes, we have freedom of speech, but how many times have you heard this before? I believe in freedom of speech, but drawing cartoons of Muhammad is taking it way too far. No one is a stronger supporter of free speech than I am, but that doesn't mean you should be allowed to insult another person's religion. Once you apply a but, free speech ceases to be a right. Instead, it becomes a concession to be rationed out by someone in authority who decides where the buts will fall. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot have freedom with buts. You cannot have half freedom, part-time freedom, contingent freedom. You cannot declare your support for free speech, but only defend those parts of it that you like or that meet your preferred set of standards. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution provided a clear, unambiguous commitment to free speech, thereby setting a gold standard for civil liberties that is still unequaled anywhere in the world, more than 200 years later. This is what I have set my sights on for Austria and Europe. Now, before it's too late, we need to reclaim our right to speak freely. Our time is short in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, please keep us in your prayers. Thank you very much.